Donald Trump has not shied away from outbursts on his social media platform Truth Social, and on Wednesday he shared a barrage of posts, several of them deleted, that called for his political opponents to be jailed. Among the dozens of posts the former president reposted was this doctored image that depicts several of his political adversaries in orange jail jumpsuits. The former president also shared a misogynistic post surrounding Vice President Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton. That post suggested Harris traded sexual favors to boost her political career. Going to bring in our political panel now, Shelby Talcott and Finn Gomez. Shelby's political reporter for Semafor. Finn is our political director here at CBS News. All right, Finn, let's start off with, what do you make of these social media posts? He knows people are going to see them. He knows people are going to read them. We're 68 days from Election Day. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think that barrage that you saw, I mean, it was clearly the Trump of old, the Trump where we've heard a lot about this cycle of a disciplined Trump, of a Trump that is focusing on message. And I think since Vice President Harris moved to the top of the ticket, now a little over a month ago, you've seen him go off message. You see him go off the rails here, and this is what happened over these posts over the last 24 hours. I think politically it's a misfire. It causes more attention to where the campaign does not want to go, and I think it could cost them. We have seen a divide amongst women voters, men voters in between the two camps. There's a pretty significant gulf between supporters of the Trump campaign and Harris campaign. More women are supporting Vice President Harris, and that can only grow with these kind of social media posts. It's off message.
The campaign seemed undisciplined Monday, Shelby, with this incident at Arlington National Cemetery. Tell us what you have on that, or what you think about the latest developments on that.
Yeah, so when I talked to Donald Trump's campaign, they clearly want to put this behind them. When I've talked to his advisors, they say this is about him going there, him honoring these people that were killed during the Afghanistan withdrawal. Where was Joe Biden? That's where the focus should be. And I know Finn has spoken to some of the family members, and so has more on that. But that's how Donald Trump's team is kind of is focusing on this, and it is that they're not really, right. They're saying this isn't an issue. This didn't have to do with Donald Trump himself. We should stay focused on what's actually going on.
Yeah, my Trump sources have been telling me the same thing, that that there's been a lack of focus on the whole point of being there. The disastrous pullout of Afghanistan, the 13 dead service members, the 100 dead Afghans that happened. But at the same time, the fact of the matter is there are, and they have said, of course, that they were invited by one of the members of the family to this hallowed site. But it's very clear there's a policy that says that this type of activity is not allowed on site. I did speak to a Gold Star family just a little while ago, and they have been very critical of Donald Trump's visit to Arlington National Cemetery. Their son's buried there. They think this kind of activity should not occur there. Any sort of political activity and any sort of tension really takes away and lessens the significance and again, the hollowed space that is the Arlington National Cemetery.
And I think, just to your point, at the end of the day, what happened on Monday, the incident that happened, we don't know the full details.
True.
It's sort of a he said, she said situation, but something clearly happened.
Yeah.
And it just is more broadly representative of how Donald Trump keeps having these incidents, whether it's him reposting things on social media or his campaign team doing something at Arlington National Cemetery, that are distracting. And it's a distraction from what his campaign advisors want him to focus on and want his campaign to focus on, which is the issues: immigration, the border, the economy. And all of these things are essentially distractions.
What people are not talking about this week is immigration, inflation, the economy.
Exactly.
They're talking about all these other events that have occurred.
It's the time of the election cycle where we also focus in closely on any poll, any substantive name brand poll that comes along.
Scott, I love polls. So.
Fox News' poll is something that caught people's attention on Wednesday. It had quite a divide between the head-to-head battles between Vice President Harris and former President Trump in those Sun Belt states: North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. And the Senate candidates on the Republican side trailing significantly. Big delta between Trump and the Republican Senate candidates. Shelby, let me start with you. What do you make of that?
I would think that there's a few things here. You know, you see, for example, how Carrie Lake is polling compared to Donald Trump, and it sort of shows that some of Donald Trump's, and we've seen this in the midterms in years past, Donald Trump doesn't always pick the best people. But it also shows that there's a real divide with the American public over how they feel about Donald Trump and Kamala Harris and how they feel about some of these other presidential candidates. It's really unique, right? You have candidates who, for example, plan to vote for Donald Trump, but really don't like Carrie Lake, which is interesting because politically, they're pretty similar. They get along really well in private. They're good friends.
They carry themselves similarly.
Exactly. And so I don't know quite why, considering, as you said, they are so similar, but there is a divide between the top of the ticket and the down ballot candidates.
And Finn, it's not just Arizona. It may be most profound in Arizona, but we do see this in some of the other races, including the North Carolina governor race and the Nevada Senate race.
Right, and like North Carolina is growing in its significance. That's something that we all should be emphasizing because it is a critical battleground state. That even if, like, potentially, if Harris loses that state, and if you look at the maps of 270, if she loses that state, she could still win if she wins North Carolina. Both campaigns know this. It's so significant, and what's happening there with Mark Robinson, one of the most controversial candidates of this cycle, who's running for governor, the lieutenant governor there, is he's having a down ballot effect. He's pulling Donald Trump down, if you will. If you look at that data from that Fox poll that came out, and it is having an impact, and it could have an impact in that presidential race as well. Look, I do love Arizona. I think that is that race. I think it is a huge race. I'm really into it, and what Gallego is doing and what we're seeing, we're hearing, what his he told me himself that one of his focus and his the way he's addressing immigration, I think is they believe, Democrats in his campaign believe that it is a successful recipe potentially for Democrats to win on that issue.
To be the aggressor.
To be the aggressor, but also having a more of a sort of a moderate, if you will, centrist perspective on the border, right? Not, he comes from, he is a progressive in a lot of ways on certain policies, but to have a more centrist perspective on the border is effective. He's a veteran. He's Latino, with the 30% of the population in that state is Hispanic. So I think there's multiple components there. But on immigration, probably the top two issues of this cycle, he could have a winning formula that could be more expansive, similar to what you covered yourself in the New York 3rd special election, right, where Swazi came out and won on that issue as well, found a way for Democrats to really come out of the forest there.
Shelby, you have a piece of reporting about Virginia's Governor Glenn Youngkin making the argument Virginia could be one of those battleground states. When he won the governorship in 2021, I suppose it sure was. What did you find out? Yeah,
I'm skeptical to say the least right now. But this is the period of the campaign cycle where you hear things like that. We have seen a few polls recently that shows Donald Trump trailing Kamala Harris just by 3 points in Virginia, which is notable, of course. And a lot of people in Virginia politics believe that is because of Glenn Youngkin. He has really high favorability ratings. He is well liked. He has done a lot in the states, and they believe that with his help, and if he campaigns more aggressively for Donald Trump, then theoretically Donald Trump could win Virginia. Again, I am skeptical, and this reminds me of, when I hear Democrats say that Florida is in play for them. I think at the end of the day, it's a lot of talk, and you have to follow the money, right? And Donald Trump has not spent money in Virginia, and just as Kamala Harris has not really spent any significant amount of money in Florida, besides to troll him in this Mar-a-Lago area earlier this week.
I saw that, yeah.
So until they both start investing in these sorts of states, it is sort of just talk.
Virginia is purple. It's a purple state, but it's got a bluish tint. I mean, it's an uphill battle to turn that state red. I mean, and maybe Youngkin's seeing something that others are not, but it is sort of blue there, Scott.
Or maybe he's saying that because he wants the opportunity to interview with Shelby Talcott and Finn Gomez. Thank you both.
Thanks, Scott.